And that struck me like a lightning bolt. And I was like, I can't think of a damn game that does. No. I wonder what happens if you do use the physical location of the dice in relationship to the miniatures. And so the first thing that occurred to me was like, well, we could do a random movement system here. That'd be fine. You roll some dice and you move towards the dice. That seems good. Maybe the number on the dice is the number of inches that you roll. Yeah, that seems like fun. That's going to be very chaotic. I wonder what theme I could... Drunk orcs, yes!
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, the podcast where I delve into the minds of tabletop gaming creatives. Join me as I uncover their creative process and inspirations. You are in the right place if you enjoy listening to thoughtful interviews with creative people.
This is James D'Amato. When I'm not thinking of new ways to make little guys kiss each other, I listen to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy, friends. Craig here. My guest today is Mike Hutchinson from Planet Smasher Games, the maker of two of my favorite miniature games, Gaslands and A Billion Suns. Mike is also on the Small Triple Talk Club. This is his third appearance on the show. Mike, welcome back to the third floor.
Hello there, Craig. Lovely to be back.
So before we hit the record button, you were telling me about Salute yesterday, and you had a chance to show off and talk about the game that we're going to spend time talking about today. But I'd be curious, before we dive into the game itself, what were the questions you got? So they had flyers, they come over to the booth, they say, what is the space Gits? What kind of reaction did it get?
So Salute is like the biggest miniature wargaming show we've got here, and I timed it specially so that Space Gits was live. Gentle listener, if at any point I sound incoherent, it's because I just came back from a con and I'm a little bamboozled, still recovering. It's an excellent question. The thing that they wanted to know is they came over and they were like, dexterity skirmish game? Like what is, prove it. Like, what do you mean? So
I know those words just not put together.
Yeah, exactly. They were like, I don't know what this is. So that was like, I was, standing at the booth, and I'd set it up so that there was a demo table just in front of me and I was behind the table. And do you know what? I've never felt more like one of those snake oil salesmen from like the Old West.
That's the worst.
Because like somebody would come over and I'd start pitching the dexterity game to them. You know, I'd got a run of jokes, lined up. My pitch was fairly well oiled by the middle of the day. And people would start to gather around because they were hearing words that they don't normally hear connected. And then suddenly I'm in that situation where there's like 8 or 9 people in a horseshoe around me. I'm speaking to the one target punter, but like I'm carefully I'm engaging the other guys, and I'm like making eye contact. It felt like old school showmanship. Like and now by my tonic. So yeah, it was good.
It's very funny. At one point in my career, many a company ago, I did booth work at conventions. Nothing as exciting as miniatures. It was for freaking stock software, which that's exciting. But man, it was brutal, and like on your feet the whole time, and having the same effing conversation again and again and again, and getting asked the same question again and again. And it's the first time they've asked the question. It's the first time they've heard your pitch, but it's the 50th time you've done it. And I don't think people really understand how exhausting that is. So I appreciate you finding some energy today to talk to me.
Yeah, and I think like I'm actually delighted that I feel pretty alive and exuberant today compared to what I normally do after one of these shows, because I think over the last couple of years, like we can talk a little bit more about this, but like I went through a pretty significant period of occupational burnout, which is kind of how I ended up making the decision to dive into this full time. And in the deeper moments of that exhaustion, like I think like I kind of flipped into a heavy introversion mode where talking to people was like super energy draining, and like I just came out like a husk. And honestly, Craig, it would be like 7 days before I was a functioning human again after like, I believe you. Yeah. And so it's great that like that salesmanship, I was still able to do it. It was that much more exhausting, but it's not so much this time. This is actually I'm feeling like I'm on the bounce.
Well, and that's got to be a little bit of a signal for you, right, Mike? That, like maybe this is like better now, my life, and I can like do this and it doesn't take every spoon out of my drawer.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I'm an introvert, which people find surprising because I freaking have, talk show YouTube channel and do the whole thing. And I make my career talking to people at my 9-to-5 job. But that's because people don't understand necessarily what being an introvert means. And you said it perfectly, which is where do you get what drains your energy and where do you get your energy?
Yeah.
Right. Now, are you made it sound like you were in a severe introvert mode and it would have a long recovery for you. What's your default state? As your default state, you get energy talking to people. Is your default state, I don't mind talking to people. I enjoy talking to people, but that's not how I recharge.
I think my default state is a little bit more center stage, and I've always been introverted on some level, but like not, it's also one of those things that like when you're younger, connecting with people is a hunger that I felt, and as I got older, that started to get away a little bit, and then like other factors, the burnout kicked in and it kind of kicked it into overdrive. But I think like what I'm resetting to now is like I am by nature, like I would be happily here sitting painting, listening to heavy metal, writing war games, but like not all the time because because that gets lonely, and the being away from people is my recharge state, but it's not like the thing that I always draw joy from. I guess joy and energy being different things in that equation.
They are. Yeah. In fact, I think one of the things that my therapist and I talk a lot about is the fact that if you do too much of that, isolate yourself, then joy escapes completely from your life, and that freaking blows too. So I can sympathize with that. How has the transition been? Like one of the fears I often hear about is when you turn what you love and your hobby into work, suddenly it doesn't quite stay what you love to do, and it doesn't bring you as much joy. Has that happened? Yeah,
I've obviously heard that a bunch as well, and no, not in the merest. Not at all in any way has it. Like one of the things I am doing is I'm switching between projects or activities or creative outlets.
That's nice.
And that's keeping things fresh. But like at no point during the last 2 years have I woken up and gone, hot dang, I have to write more miniature games and paint more miniatures. This is such a drag, man. And it's stupid because, you do hear that hoary old chestnut of like, don't make your passion your work because then it's your work. And I don't know. I just haven't experienced that in any way. And I think that like keeping my family close in my equation of like where I spend my time, making sure that I'm aware that I can burn out and I'm sensitive that like sometimes I've been like really hammering the anvil for like 5 or 7 days, or there was a period prepping for Space Gits where I did like 12 days on the trot without really taking a weekend or any kind of break, and I could feel it creeping up. I was like, do you know what, I'm just gonna play video games for 2 days and I'm not gonna beat myself up for that.
One thing that's good about a full-time job is it gives our lives structure. There's a lot of things that suck about it, but that's one thing that can be nice about it. How has that been for you? Have you been disciplined, like in saying that, I am going to import in a structure for myself, or has it been somewhat whimsical and you kind of follow the brightest light? What happens there for you?
I guess there are 2 or 3 elements to that. One is like straight off the bat, I imported my 2-week cycle. So I came from software product management. That's what I was doing before I quit. And, I've worked for whatever it is, like 15 years doing 2-week sprints. And so that's very bedded in to me. And so I set myself goals at the beginning of every 2-week period and I see if I hit those goals. And it doesn't really matter if I do or I don't, because it's only me that I'm accountable to, but at least I'm accountable.
Yep.
So that's helped because I brought that in, and that helps on the kind of micro or the medium level. The other thing I did is I bought a massive laminated wall chart, like our year wall chart. And I've been putting in like, when's the kids' summer holidays? Like, when is the Salute show? Like, when am I planning to launch the Space Gits Kickstarter? And I'm a little bit ADHD, so I can't really conceive of time on a certain horizon very accurately. So rather than just waking up one day and going, oh man, I was supposed to launch the Kickstarter yesterday, I can see it at all the times. Like as I'm walking into my office, it's there on the wall next to me. And so that's given me structure, and that's allowed me to sort of think, well, could I deliver on this date? And how many weeks is that actually? And how much am I really getting done every 2-week cycle and all that good stuff? But the other thing, actually, Craig, is that I read a book I read a couple books last summer that were quite impactful. One of which was come on, convention brain, awaken. One of them was called I can't do it. I can't remember. I have like a whole TED talk here that I can't evoke because I can't remember the name of the book. Anyway, I read this damn good book, and I'll tell you about it in a minute. But it pointed.
You'll email it to me. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, exactly. It pointed me to another book by Mason Curry called Daily Rituals. And Daily Rituals by Mason Curry, he's a journalist, and so it's a very chatty, easygoing book. But the premise of the book is, let me tell you like 150 scientists, artists, creators, musicians, whatever, and I'll tell you just what they did during their day. And so you've got people who, woke up rigorously at the bell on 6 o'clock and went for a run and whatever. Or you've got these like French poets who wake up at 4 PM, eat 2 croissants, smoke drugs and then work until 4 AM. And what's fun is that I'd been thinking about my daily routine to try and figure out, do I do certain things at certain times of day? Do I clear my email admin at the start, so I've got a clear desk and then get down to it, blah, blah, blah. When do I know that I've done enough work? But it's really fun reading this book, Daily Rituals, because what happened was, as I was reading these rituals, I was reading some and going like, well, that's ridiculous. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that sounds a bit like that other one. Oh, that rings a bell. And after reading about, 60 or 70 of them, I was just like, yeah, people who take a walk at lunchtime, people who start their most interesting creative work straight away after breakfast and then excuse themselves for a walk at lunchtime and then do the tedious admin in the afternoon. I started to get jealous of those people because I was like, yeah, I'm a real grouch at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't do creative work then. I need cake and tea, and look, I may as well just be doing tedious admin work at that point. So I started to flip it round, and I didn't do my clearing the desk admin work as soon as I'd had my first cup of coffee. I just went, yeah, let's do the first thing I do is do exciting creative work, and once I've exhausted that for the day. And also a lot of these like novelists were like, yeah, if I write for 3 hours, that's a great day. Like if you add those 3 hours up over the year, you get a lot of words written. And there was me thinking like, oh, I got to do 8 to 10 hours of solid creative work, or I'm dragging my feet here. And that was a bit of a wake up call as well. So yeah, lots. I've thought about this quite a lot. Like I've given it quite a lot of my time, because I don't want to live in a sort of world where I'm nebulously anxious about how much work I'm doing, and also that I'm like frustrating myself by accidentally doing things in the wrong order, like trying to do the most interesting work at the most tired time of the day.
That's the beauty of the structure of that book, it sounds like, though, right?
Yeah.
It's just like here it all is find yourself, right? As opposed to
if you're a night owl and you want to be like Gertrude Stein or whoever it was that like worked only during the nighttime hours, like great, that's you do you.
Yeah, and I would imagine too, Mike. I mean, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't envision a world where you flippantly just quit your job and said, I guess I'm going to do this now. I would imagine you went through a considerable amount of thought process before you made the jump. Is that accurate?
Yes. I think, I got excited about writing games a long time ago. And then we talked about the process of launching Gaslands and that kind of, it was a slow burn to begin with, and then it really caught fire. And then, Billion Suns was successful, and Osprey were really pleased with how that sold and so forth. And I think, ultimately, like a friend of mine, he said he read this thing where he'd read this blog post or something. It was like, if you want to be happy in life, write down the 20 things that you want to achieve before you die, and then cross out number 6 to 20 and just focus on the top 5.
Interesting.
And then I read a book called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek's very hip in like tech management thinking circles. But anyway, he has this great book which is about not setting yourself goals that are finite that you can achieve, but setting yourself sort of infinite ongoing challenges. And so I took these two ideas and I sort of combined them into this set of, and it ended up just being 4 rather than 5, including, the top one being like live a happy life with my beautiful wife, and the second one being raise 2 happy and healthy girls. But the third one,
order of those things,
the third one had always been be a world-renowned games designer. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've been working towards. And so that remains like, beyond those first 2, that remains like kind of the ultimate mission. It's just like, I'm trying to do the things that enable that. And so I'd gotten to the point after like with Hobgoblin was interesting because I didn't run the Hobgoblin Kickstarter. That was, you remember talking to Gregory Alexi about it, but like that went really well. But I was not. I was again like the author working for the publisher, and I just thought that because I'd been building up this reputation through the games, and I'd been building up this sort of brand on YouTube through the Rule of Carnage podcast, it just felt like there was a good enough bedrock of like my brand and awareness of me that I could probably build, a one-person business on this, and so that was the risk. And then I was thinking about, I was at Epic Games at the time, which was an extremely interesting company to work for, and the work was super interesting, but there were two problems. One was it's a video game company, and so it had a sort of, employees can't go and create their own IP. That's quite a common clause in video games, I'm led to understand. But that was problematic for me because I'm always inventing things and making up new games, and not being able to do that was kind of psychically a problem for me. And then also the job just started to like, I was at the point where I was like, oh man, I really love working for this company. I might be here for another 10, 15 years. This is great. And then a couple of things changed, and the sort of bottom fell out of it. And so that just accelerated what was already like a long-term dream. Was like at the point that I feel I've got enough, capital saved up to like take a risk for like, basically give myself like an 18-month runway or something to fail, then I'll probably do this, but I don't know when that'll be. And then these conditions kind of assembled together, and I was like, do you know what? This is it. Like I think I've got what I need in terms of people knowing about me, and now I've got the impetus to just get off my butt and do this. So yeah, that was kind of how it happened.
I don't think we'd ever talked about the fact that you were with Epic. So I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, which obviously this is where Epic is based. And several friends that work for Epic, and they are not known for a light workload.
It's
But they're not unique either in the industry.
No, I mean, like video games are often made by mid-sized companies who are led by passionate people and who want to do great things. And there's working for Fortnite was a heck of a thing. Yeah, but the company is very, it's been growing very quickly, and there is it was just tricky for me, like being all the way out here in the sticks without a kind of ability to connect with my colleagues directly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
But I have been hanging out I spent like 3 or 4 years ago, I came to Raleigh quite a few times.
I'm pissed about that because
I didn't know.
I know, isn't that funny? But anywho, Lou, I do want, before we start talking about Space Gits, I do want to talk about the book. So you just flippantly said, oh yeah, by the way, Craig, there's this book, and you dropped that in my lap. I'm like, holy shit. So the book, the Fundamentals of Tabletop Miniature Game Design. 2 questions. First off, give me an idea of where the genesis of this is. It's a partnership. It's co-written. Where did it start to bubble?
Yeah, so this is a textbook published by an honest-to-goodness academic publisher, and it covers as it says, the fundamentals of designing tabletop miniature games. So, I've told you before about the Rule of Carnage podcast, which is the game design conversations that I have with my good buddy Glenn Ford, who's
phenomenal show.
Thank you. And so we were maybe a year and a bit into that, with a sum total of 300 followers or something on YouTube. And we got this email out of the blue from CRC Press, one of their commissioning editors, just being like, hey, our textbooks on video game design are doing very well, thank you very much, but we're looking to move into a bit more like tabletop stuff. Would you like to pitch us a book on miniature games? And my wife for much of her career has been an academic, so she knew the shape that one of these like pitches abstracts should be, so she helped us formulate something. And we put together this proposal, and they were like, yeah, that looks totally convincing. Let's go ahead and do that. And I was at the point where I was, still working at Epic, so I wasn't able to like spend a lot of time like putting out new games and thinking about that stuff. So I was like, oh, actually, this is a fantastic thing. Like working on a kind of academic textbook, it's sort of takes my like brand as, you know, innovative war games designer and allows me to sort of sharpen it up and legitimize it. And it's fun because like neither Glenn and I are academics, and so this was mostly, you know, I like to talk about it as this is a book from practitioners, not from academics. So it's very practical, and it's like, well, you know, if you want to design a miniatures game, like here's a bunch of things that you could think about. Here's a way of like attacking the sort of individual mechanical elements. But we took the time and the opportunity in the first third of the book to get a little philosophical and to try and pin down, like, what the heck is one of these games? And when I mean one of these games, I mean one of these ones that I make, not one of those ones that's a big box with miniatures in, but also has like cardboard tiles and is like the Doom or the Massive Darkness. Like, not one of those. And not like Dungeons and Dragons where you're playing with miniatures. Not one of those. You know, one of those Warhammer ones. One of those. And so trying to actually draw a circle around what that is and what it isn't was one of the funnest parts of the process. And we ended up.
What was the big insight, Mike? Like, what did you figure out going through that process?
Glenn had a moment of lucidity and was like, I think the word non-discrete is important. He chose the word non-discrete because the word analog would be equally useful, but all of these games are made of cardboard and not computers, and therefore they are all analog tabletop games. Right. Yep. But he hit on this idea of the relative position of markers in space in a non-discrete manner was kind of what defined these games. Like, if there are markers in space and their relationship non-discretely matters and is the core of what the interest of the game is, then it's one of these games. And
shit, that's cool.
And then I thought, well, actually there's a pun here, because the other thing that's super interesting about these games that I feel is definitional is that they're non-discrete in their components. So you can bring anything into these games and they provide a system that will accept it. So the example we give in the book is, if we're playing a game of Monopoly and I place my shoe into the Monopoly board, it breaks the game. Like, there's no way of describing the game. If we're playing Warhammer and I put my shoe into we can just say, well, that's just impassable terrain, you know, offer some cover. Like, there's an engine in that system to accept anything. Because it has to, because I'm going to make, you know, terrain out of toilet roll and, you know, bits of beer can and like whatever I'm going to make, I'm going to bring my own non-discrete components in. It's not the stuff that's in the box. It's something that, you know, it's accepting. And so these games, non-discrete miniatures games, have to have these engines to support the importing of weird stuff, and then they have to have some method of like describing and examining the relationship between markers in space, and we use tape measures for that quite a lot of the time, but not always. So that was the big insight. It was striking on that and being like, oh, okay, maybe it's not about list building because that's shared with Magic the Gathering. Maybe it's not about miniatures because there's a number of different ways that, you know, maybe it's not about the bringing your own imaginative world in because that's the same as role playing games. So we had to try and strike off all these things to try and find out, well, what is the essential meaning of this sort of game? You know, the one that we like to make and play.
I'm a little annoyed by you because you kind of blew my mind a little bit. So well done. Because all of that makes sense and I never would have thought of it.
It did take us 2 years to get there.
You had a running start. Do you in any way talk in the book, and Christ, we could make this the whole podcast if we wanted to, so I'm not going to do that, but do you talk in the book about fun, measuring fun, or measuring if the game is successful, or how do you know if the game brings joy? Does any of that make sense? Do you get into that at all?
Yeah, 100%. That's absolutely central. And like there are two or three chapters in the first third almost exclusively dedicated to that. Because of course, like that's the whole thing. Now, there's a few ways to skin this cat. And so I present a few different mental models in the book. Mm-hmm. We do. And one of the ones that I like a lot is, well, let me preface this by saying, of course, there are different kinds of gamers. And so we present in the book a bit of a sort of miniature game, sort of re-themed version of some of the like Bartle's taxonomy and the Magic the Gathering player persona taxonomies. But we'll try and examine them from the point of view of like what specific is about these non-discrete miniature games. And so without going into those in particular, because you can read those in the book, like there are, people who like to optimize to win. There are people who like to just push buttons to see explosions happen. There are people who want to evoke stories. There are people who want to play to win, but do so in a way that expresses themselves and finds funny little things that other people might not have spotted, and so on and so on. And so with that setting aside, I think the fun thing that I came to realize, particularly with miniature games, but I think it ends up really applying to lots of other kinds of games as well, is an idea of having fun be both intrinsic and extrinsic, as well as what I call diegetic and non-diegetic. So diegetic meaning like music in a film can be diegetic or non-diegetic. Like the Star Wars Cantina Band, it's actually happening inside the world of the fiction, and that's diegetic. Yep. But the Imperial March is not. That's non-diegetic. So things that happen inside the game world, like inside the fantasy of the game world, that's the diegetic fun. That's the imaginative fun that I'm having. But it could also be like the things that are clicking within. Within the story. And then the intrinsic and the extrinsic is as you would naturally expect. It's like, well, am I doing this for its own pleasure, or am I not doing it for its own pleasure? So painting a miniature is a really interesting example, because I can definitely draw at least 4 kinds of fun from that. I can have an intrinsic pleasure in painting the miniature, but that intrinsic pleasure could be non-diegetic. I've chosen a red helmet for my blue ultramarine space marine because the color theory works great. Like red and blue look amazing together because of the color wheel. Or it could be that I've painted in red because within the lore of the game, that's what the sergeant's helmet is. And so I've painted it correctly and it matches the fantasy of the world. And equally, I can be doing that extrinsically. Like I painted this model because I want to show up to the game with a beautiful painted model and kind of engage the social pleasure of my peers. Or I might be painting it for a competition and there's actually a hard extrinsic, like a trophy extrinsic thing. So I like to think about that because it doesn't necessarily mean Craig is going to be an intrinsic, non-diegetic person and Mike's going to be, it's not like that. What it is if something is happening in your game, if a piece of your game has been designed and it's not lighting up all 4 of those quadrants, maybe there's an opportunity to create more fun by thinking about, I'm not really inspiring people to I'm telling you that in the lore you should put a sergeant in your squad, but I'm not yet providing a extrinsic bonus for doing that. Maybe that's an opportunity.
Oh, that's super interesting, Mike. So
I go into this in a whole video I put on my YouTube channel recently, but it's in the book as well.
I'm gonna go watch. I haven't seen that, obviously. Did the book make you look at this in such a rigorous academic way? Did you already have a rigorous academic perspective and you just wrote it down?
That's a good question. I think it definitely, it got Glenn and I excited about being sharper. And the fact that we had to write these things down and then they would be fixed in black and white ink made us consider it and made us go, well, actually, we better pick a lane here. And obviously, there are already things in that book that I disagree with, that I wrote that I now disagree with. And that's fine, because this book is, it's the beginning of a conversation.
Wrote that down.
But writing it down took the sort of, our conversations through the Rule of Carnage podcast, we'd been orbiting around some things, but we'd never really quite figured them out. Getting to the point where we had to write a specific sentence that said exactly what we meant. The non-discrete nature of miniature games was, a great central example of okay, we've really got to puzzle this one out and get something that we can stand behind. And we wrote that chapter 5 times because it's the first major chapter in the book, and we just learned more as we tried to write it, and then we wrote more of the book and we came back to it. We just kept rewriting that chapter until we were comfortable that we were saying something that we really truly could stand behind.
I would imagine, Mike, and tell me if I'm wrong, that it sounds like it was critical that there was 2 of you. Right.
Yes.
To go bounce back and forth and to challenge each other and to say, I read that, but that's a bunch of bullshit. Or I read that. What does that mean? Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It just wouldn't have been anything as easy or as successful, I think, as a project with just one person. And I think what's super fun, and people who know the podcast will know this, Glenn and I are very different kinds of gamers. So we occupy quite different kind of parts of the Magic the Gathering spread of player types. And that's really useful because as collaborators, it means that we can spot holes in each other's designs from the perspective of a different player persona. But it also meant that like where I was, leaning in a certain direction on a particular topic, he could kind of bring a different perspective, and where he was, expressing a certain thing as being of absolute central importance on a particular topic, I'll be like, well, do you know what? I don't really care about that, and here's why here's where my perspective comes from, and then we would find the way of getting to the middle on that. And I think that was absolutely critical, because otherwise it just would have ended up being quite a lopsided, whichever one of us would have written it would have ended up lopsided.
Guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. Mike and I have a lot to talk about. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about Space Gits and what the hell a dexterity-based miniature skirmish game really is. We'll be right back.
This is Sean. You may have heard of me from such movies as Brett and Sean Go to Illinois, 2 Motorcycles, 1 Stick of Dynamite, and Gaming and BS. What kind of RPG podcast is that? After my NFTs were stolen, I decided to become a patron of Third Floor Wars. The content is great and it costs me less than a good shot of liquor. So consider becoming a patron. It may just land you your next big role. Head over to patreon.com/Third Floor Wars. Tell Craig Sean sent ya.
So Mike shot me an email and said, hey, Craig, a new game coming out like tomorrow. Can we talk about it? And I'm like, yeah, sure, Mike. But then I saw the blurb on it in your little press kit that you sent over, and I was like, dude, we got to talk about this tomorrow. So I want to read off to the audience what I read and why I was just like, yes, we can talk tomorrow, Mike. Space Gits is a dexterity-based miniature skirmish game about drunk-ass space orcs lootin', shootin', and scootin'. Space Gits features a host of unique and innovative dexterity mechanics, supports 2 to 5 players, and plays out in under an hour. It welcomes and encourages kit bashing and can be played as a drinking game. It includes rules for drunken orc-on-orc combat, a full-on campaign system, and vehicle rules. Please note that Planet Smasher Games does not condone drinking and driving except in 28mm scale. So first off, great copy. There's 7 things in there that I know what those words mean, but I don't know what they mean together, which I think is very evocative. Before we get into exactly what the hell Space Gits is, where did the acorn fall from the tree? So at what point, if we were to go forensically backwards now to the very origin point of Space Gits, where was that?
Appreciate you jumping on this topic early on short notice, because we were talking earlier about how, what's my process and how do I manage things? I got Post-it notes on my the inside of my front door. That's my project manager. I told you I had that laminated wall chart. It doesn't tell me when to email Craig. So thanks, buddy. So we were writing the second section of the textbook, The Fundamentals of Tabletop Miniature Games Design, that we were just discussing. The second section is all about the sort of big moving pieces of miniature games. The dice, the cards, the other players, the fantasy, all this stuff, before you get to real specifics of how does movement work and what should a shooting phase look like. And we were writing the section on dice, the chapter on dice, and we covered lots of different pieces about considerations of dice pools and all this kind of probability munging and stuff. And we were getting to the end of the chapter and we start to examine, all right, let's take our slippers off and kick back here. What other affordances can dice provide, and what are some examples of people who've used them in more intriguing ways, Saga's battle board, or dropping dice into a box like Space Fleet. And we got to the bit that the physical location of dice in the play area as it relates to the miniatures themselves is a thing that you could use. And that struck me like a lightning bolt. And I was like, it is a thing you could use. I can't think of a damn game that does.
No.
I wonder what happens if you do use the physical location of the dice in relationship to the miniatures. And so the first thing that occurred to me was like, well, we could do a random movement system here. That'd be fine. You roll some dice and you move towards the dice. That seems good. Maybe the number on the dice is the number of inches that you roll. Yeah, that seems like fun. That's going to be very chaotic. I wonder what theme I could drunk orcs. Yes. And so the whole thing just sort of sprung immaculately from that first thought of like, yeah, this bit of the chapter that we've written, I want to be the first person to take my own advice here.
Yeah. So the idea is we're going to throw the dice, and that is going to impact where the dice literally fall. So we spend all of our times in miniature wargaming trying to knock shit over with our dice, right? Try to discreetly contain our dice. It sounds like that does not happen here. So the origin at the very beginning of this is, can we make the physical presence of the dice on the quote unquote battlefield be a central point of the game?
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah, so to move, you roll the dice into the play area, and then you move the model directly towards that dice a number of inches equal to what's been rolled. And then I thought, well, shooting can probably work in the same way. So you take a dice and you roll the dice and you draw a line from the model to where that dice lands, and that's the line of where the bullet travels. And the first thing that the bullet hits is what the bullet hits. That seems to work. And as I was getting into it, I thought, yeah, okay, there's something else funny here, which... if I'm honest, somebody mentioned it to me yesterday. I think I might have been inspired by it, but like there's a really fun rule in the Silver Tower Warhammer Quest game where for some reason you have to stack a bunch of dice up. Maybe even you have to do it to a timer. It's really fun. Anyway, so stacking dice has always been a thing that I've found amusing. And so I thought, ooh, okay, maybe because I'd been messing around, quick name drop, but I'd been hanging out with Gav Thorpe playing a game that he'd been working on. And he'd been working on this thing about dwarf combat. And one of his hooks was like, oh, the dwarfs never die because they're like really tough. So they just get knocked over and stuff. So I was thinking about that idea and I thought, okay, well, maybe these orcs don't, this isn't a game about killing people. It's a game about, knocking each other on your ass. And so what I thought was, oh, okay, every time a model activates, it'll take a swig, and that means that you add a dice next to it, and then every time it takes a swig, it adds another dice. Every time it takes damage, like each point of damage will add another dice, and suddenly you've got this teetering tower of dice next to the orc. And so you have to keep that tower of dice in contact with the orc at all times, which means when you scoot the little model around, you have to carefully scoot the tower of dice around with it. And if it falls over, of course, the orc falls over. And in Space Gits, you can't stand up by your own volition. You're too drunk to do that. So you have to get a friend to scoot on over and boot you up the arse to get you back on your feet. And if you don't, then an enemy can scoot over and stick the boot in and nick a cap, because that's what the game is. The game is scooting around, bumping into literal physical bottle caps, which at the start of the game, you drop handfuls of bottle caps into the play area and they just scatter where they land, and that's your kind of setup. So it's very jolly and very silly, and yes, and contains these dexterity mechanics that are I don't think I've seen either of these things in any other game.
Not in this exact same way, right? So like I've seen RPGs like Grant Howard has put out a one-pager RPG that we just played at camping where you stack the dice up to represent a horse, the horse losing its shit. Mm-hmm. And when it falls over, then the horse does like crazy stuff, and that dexterity thing. Mm-hmm. Really fun. But yeah, and I've seen other RPGs too where you make the map of the dungeon by throwing dice out, and that becomes the map, and each of the die numbers represent a different room.
That's true, and actually there's a classic wargaming campaign textbook which describes a similar thing. Exactly that. You make your country by tossing dice.
But not exactly the way you do it. So, and it sounds to me like, Mike, that the theme and the mechanics were informing each other, that you would come up with a mechanic and then you would be able to then make it intrinsic to the game, and in the world of the orc falling over, the taking the swig. Was it a lot of back and forth like that, or did the mechanics dominate the design, or did the theme dominate the design?
For me, it's always the marriage of the two. And actually, like, maybe we talked about this with A Billion Suns, but like quite often there's a point in my game design where like at the start there's some like core idea that ignites the fire, and I'm like, oh, I've got this image. And for Billion Suns, it was that moment in Rogue One where where the rebels are trying to escape the planet, and a Star Destroyer like jumps in and like smashes one of the ships out of the way. And I was like, wow, that's an incredible image. Like, how would that work on the table? And then with most of my games, like there comes a point where there's enough mechanical kind of description that I need a new yardstick to measure new ideas or measure the current mechanics by. And that is when like sharpening up the conceits and the theme and the fantasy of the game starts to really matter. And with A Billion Suns, I didn't know it was a game about like warring corporations in space until about 50% through the design. And once I had that, I was like, oh, now I can start naming mechanics in a way that they connect together, and I can, you know, create the fantasy in that way. So I think with Space Gits, it was quite early on in the discussion that I came to this idea that there's a planet and it has a mega city on it, and all of the warlike orcs have just gone off to war to like rampage through whatever system they're in, like grabbing the loot. And all the people that are left are the spindly, whiny, dirty little gits that aren't fit for military service. So what are they up to? Well, they're rampaging across the city. Yeah.
That's amazing.
They're all rampaging across the city, rioting, looting, and stealing televisions. The Gits.
So, Mike, when you get to that 50% mark, where you need to, I like your use of the term yardstick, right, to remeasure things, and you come up with the corporate structure in the fiction for A Billion Suns. You come up with the idea of, you know, who are these orcs, right? They're not the orcs that are really good at stuff because they're already out there fighting. This is the other thing. Do you find yourself then going backwards and changing things that you have committed to, saying, now that I figured this out, I go back and look at this mechanic or this conceit that I made earlier and realize it doesn't fit anymore, and I need to rethink that? Or is what happens at that 50% mark you fitting what has been done, and that's written in pen? Does that make sense? Yeah, totally.
Yes, I absolutely do. And it gives me an opportunity to sort of reset and see which of these darlings needs slaying. And actually, interestingly, there's a second point where this happens as well, which is too late in the process to do anything about, and so is quite frustrating. And I wish I was slightly better at this. But like I was telling you about how at the Salute show, I was enjoying like pitching the game to people. I was like, you know, trying my showmanship and trying to explain the game in, you know, 5 or 6 sentences that I kind of got down pat. And particularly, you know, as people walk past, I would say, this is a dexterity-based skirmish game about drunk-ass space orcs. And that would catch their attention. I found the like log line to grab people's interest. And quite often, once I have that, I know what it is that doesn't matter in the game and I should have cut out. And so with A Billion Suns, like I'm getting an opportunity to make a second edition of Billion Suns, as we might touch on a bit more. But like, that's a great opportunity for me to say, well, I got all the way to the end of the design process with A Billion Suns, but actually there's some cruft in that which just doesn't like serve the, you know, I'm a man enough to admit that like that was my difficult second album and I had something to prove. So I maybe crammed a few too many ideas in there.
A little too clever, Mike.
A little bit too clever there. So there is a bunch of things in that like, you know, if you really focus on what the core conceit of the game is and what like you would tell someone in a pitch to it, then that can really help. And so with Space Gits, I think I was lucky but also a bit more disciplined about like, no, I really know what this game is supposed to sell itself as, and so I'm not going to add a bunch of flappy other stuff that doesn't deliver on that sort of core fun engine. So yeah, both of those moments I think are places where I'll like essentially try and walk around the block, come back with fresh eyes and be like, okay, what is this game and which of these bits actually matter?
So where does, and this is going to be a little bit of a right turn, but it still fits, I think, where does the I'm going to make a second edition idea pop up, right? You could have never touched Billion Suns again. Mm-hmm. I think I've blown so much smoke up your ass about this game and have talked to everybody about this game because I think it's a really important game in the history of game design. I think there's some things in there. At what point do you, because that happens with all your games, right? Where you go, oh man, I wish I could have done this. I wish I could have done this, but you let it lie, you let it die. You don't do it again. Uh-huh. When does when's the dam break and you go, screw it, I got to make a second edition?
I think with A Billion Suns specifically, I was sufficiently frustrated enough about what I perceive to be core problems with the game.
Interesting.
That are like, they're a bit, they're more like accessibility problems with the game. Like the game is awesome, but it's hard to get into. It's hard to understand. It's hard to build a fleet for. Like it's difficult to get to the table. It's unreasonably difficult to get to the table.
I could see that, yeah.
And I was chatting to Offspray about, opportunities for this, that, and the other, and I was like, look, they were saying, look, Billion Suns is still selling. It's still selling really strongly, and I was saying, like, yeah, I'd really like. They were like, well, is there a Gaslands refueled kind of thing here that could happen? I was like, actually, it's not so much about more content. I think what it is I'd like another crack at this game, because it was so hard to write that even with the time that I spent on it, I just don't think I got it to its best format, as opposed to Gaslands, which like Gaslands has a few core problems as well that I'd like to resolve in the future. But like that one, and particularly Hobgoblin, like, I don't want to write a second edition of Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin is a gemstone. Like, I'd be happy to have that sitting around selling until I die. Like, it's a great game. Ask me again in 10 years, I'll probably think something different. But, like, I don't have any central problem with Hobgoblin. I think it's absolutely what it needed to be. And that's probably because it had, like, 7 years of me thinking about it. So I think it's a combination of a real interest to make the game again and an opportunity to make the game again. And if either one of those things is missing, then there's no point.
Is it exciting to go back there, or is it more exciting to start something new?
Good question. I think if I'm honest, it's more exciting to make something new. That's why I don't expand my games. But I tell you what's exciting, is when I wrote A Billion Suns, I was very deliberate about not making a battleships in space game. And I talked about this on my design blog and stuff. Like, there's a bunch of battleships in space games. Like, lots of people have done that. Let me try something different. Let me get high concept on you. And since then, like where we stand today, Star Wars Armada has gone away. The other Armada game, I can't remember the name, Firestorm Armada has gone away. Drop's Fleet Commander's still kicking around. They haven't brought back Battlefleet Gothic, which I thought they would do at some point in the last 5 years.
I swear to God, they've been promising it for 10 years.
Yeah, and they had a video game IP and that didn't manifest into a miniatures game re-release and stuff. So one of the problems with A Billion Suns is it's not providing any way to have just like a smash each other's spaceships to pieces game. And I like smashing people's spaceships to pieces as much as the next man. So I think that's the other thing is like accessibility to the game can mean providing those kinds of ways to play, which is like, the hardcore like economic mode is still there. It's still absolutely accessible. It's just that if you just wanted to build a list and smash some ships out of the sky, then that's also available. And so I'm much more bullish about. I'm much less worried about offering that because I don't think there's a differentiation problem anymore. There was a differentiation problem to be solved with A Billion Suns when it first came out, but I don't think that there isn't another Offspray. Space fleet battle game that I would be competing with. There isn't even really another miniature agnostic space fleet battle game. So
with Space Gits, you're breaking, I don't know if this was a solid rule or just a trend with you, but there's actually going to be miniatures available for Space Gits, which is gets into the accessibility piece, to be quite honest with you. I mean, and that's one of the struggles that I had for Billion Suns getting it to the table. I mean, the Billion Suns does a great job of saying, hey, just grab whatever you want. But there's also I want to have my miniatures for this game too. So where's the decision making there? Like, people have orc miniatures everywhere. Why do we need Space Gits?
So it's definitely a kit bashing first game, and it's written with a very similar mindset to Gaslands insofar as like you buy chassis types. You got an orc or a bull orc or a goblin or a clankbot, and so then you start buying them weapons and fighting weapons and shooting weapons, but you can also buy them a range of fancy gear. Like you can buy them a big hat so they can boss people around, or you can buy them a big spanner. So the idea being that when you build a model with a certain set of flavorful elements on the model, I want you to be able to describe that in rules terms to sort of get rewarded for your fun kit bashing. But I wanted this game to be, I wanted a successful Kickstarter that could really support me for another 12 months of making crazy game design. And I was thinking about how to achieve this when I was already in a conversation with Cromlech on a different topic, and I was like, oh, by the way, like, do you mind if I use your miniatures in the rule book, because I'm looking around, I'm looking at various STL manufacturers and trying to figure out like what would look cool to photograph and put in the book. And they were like, whoa, wait, we can do much better than that. Let's like properly, like, let's make you an exclusive miniature. Like, there are some cool terrain pieces in this game. Like, why don't we make a teleporter loo and make these vending machines? Like, this would be amazing. And so that kind of blossomed into much more of a partnership on this, where what I like about Cromlech is their bits are really flexible. So they make a lot of bits of orcs, like, legs and bodies and heads and stuff. And their heads are very ludicrous. There's a lot of ludicrous heads in their range. And so like the chef heads and the monocle wearing top hat wearing heads and the like, these like 50s rockers with the giant pompadour, what do you call it?
Pompadour, yeah.
The pompadour hairstyles. Like they're really fun, stupid looking models that frankly looks kind of stupid on the battlefield, but in a game about rioting across an urban, mega city, they just work brilliantly. And so I think we stared lovingly across the table at each other, and we were like, yeah, let's just make this happen. And so what I'm selling miniature wise as part of the Kickstarter, there's an exclusive miniature called Officer Crunk, but everything else is just basically little baggies of trousers and arms, because the game is about kit bashing, and so you can buy enough models to like kit bash a little squad of 5 dudes, but I'm also going to give you too many arms so that you've got like options to mash things up. So even though there are miniatures available as part of the Kickstarter, they are neither coherent like boxes of miniatures, nor are they actually official Space Kits miniatures. I just have partnered up with Cromlech.
That's cool. So my last question, and the last, I think, evocative piece that really caught my attention is plays out in under an hour. Was that a design goal, or did it just end up there?
Oh, was that a design goal? I don't think it was an explicit design goal at the beginning. I think what it emerged from was the intersection of how long is it funny and fun to have these towers of dice building up, and at what point does the game kind of naturally collapse on itself, right? And like the very real sense that this was quite a light-hearted, goofy game that wasn't going to necessarily be the main course of your gaming evening. Or if it was, you would play probably multiple games. Because, like, it's got a flavour of... I don't want to say that Space Kits is a filler game, because I really don't want to do my own game down. But, there are, like, really fun board games that you get out and you love every time you play, but they only take 30 minutes, and they aren't that giant, heavy Euro game that you're going to spend the rest of the game night playing, whatever. And I'm just super sensitive also about, like, Gaslands has an anarchic mindset and then takes sort of 2.5 to 3 hours to play. And I just wish it didn't. And, if I do ever get another swing at Gaslands, like, that's, splat bang in my, like, top 2 design goals for fixing on Gaslands. So with Space Kits, I wanted to come right out the gate. Would be like, no, I want to figure out how to make a multiplayer party game that like doesn't overstay its welcome. That is like, okay, wow, that was brilliant. Everything fell to pieces in a hilarious car crash, but I want to re-rack and I want to play again. And oh, look, I've rolled on these tables and now one of my guys got a bionic leg and a squig for a brain. Like, let's carry on and go. And so I think it was definitely, and it's also definitely just emergent from the fact that like, it's got this really energetic, riotous vibe to it that like, it's not right that the game descend into a 2-hour strategic think fest. Like that just ain't right.
Well, it feels like, to make an analogy to me, it feels like it's more of that 2-minute Ramones song versus the 8-minute Pink Floyd song.
You got it. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, the Kickstarter video has a parody of one of my favorite punk bands, No Means No.
Nice. So, and this ties to the length of the game, and I always find this part interesting, specifically with miniature games, is at some point the game has to be over. At some point we stop and there's a winner. Did you know how the game was going to end the whole time? Did that evolve over time? And quite frankly, how does the game end?
That one's actually tricky. The ending games is tricky. And I think with Space Gits, I have a perfectly fine answer to this question. I don't know that it's necessarily the most refined and developed. There might be a better, by the time I put the book into print, I may have come up with a better idea. But right now, the way the game ends is at the start of the game, you set a timer for 30 minutes. And at the end of the 30 minutes, when the timer goes off, the game doesn't end, but like the fuzz are starting to close in to break up this riot. And mechanically, all that happens is you can no longer boot your fallen friends back on their feet.
Oh,
so
that's fun.
When all of your guys are down, you can't activate a downed orc. So like naturally you have to leg it at the point when all of your orcs are down. And you can, at the start of any of your activations, choose to leg it, which is just like bottling it in Necromunda. And so there's a calculation about like, how many caps have I picked up? And if you bottle it, you have to replace any orc that you're still on the field with a bottle cap if they're within 6 inches of an enemy. So like if you've legged it enough, if you spread out, then you can leg it without penalty. But if you're still kind of embroiled in the melee, then you're going to have to pay a couple of caps as a penalty. And then the last player who's still in play gets to like sweep up all the in-play caps, and the person who's collected the most new caps as part of the game is the nominal winner of the game. But I think because the game is so intensely silly and the campaign system is very joyous as well, I suspect, much like Gaslands, or what I'm trying to achieve is with Gaslands, people do play to win, but they don't really mind if they lose as long as lots of things exploded. And that's what I'm trying to capture again here. So yeah, so the game ends in about 35 to 40 minutes pretty reliably. Right. And that's because I put a timer on it.
So we've talked a little bit about the entire arc, Mike, from the very beginning when you're writing this part of the book. You go, boy, I've never seen Dice do this in a miniatures game. It now evolves to the points where we've got a Kickstarter going live as we're talking now. In that journey, when did you know I'm going to take this thing to the finish line, right? When did this not become, which I'm sure you have notebooks full of, games that are not baked yet, that may never exist again, you may never revisit again, or you might kit bash into another game? When did Space Gits get to the point where you're like, this is going to be a game that I am going to put out?
I don't know. It seems so recent history that I ought to be able to remember the moment when I sort of went, yeah, this is probably the next thing. I think I have a little roadmap underneath that wall chart that I was talking about, and I have little post-it notes. Yeah, and I have little post-it notes that say like, oh, it's, Space Gits Kickstarter, or and whatever. There's some other things that I won't say and curse the fact that they might never exist or they might exist. And so I move things around and I sort of think, oh, maybe I'll do this, that, or the other. And I think the things that gave me confidence, I'm certain the things that gave me confidence were, number one, Space Gits was just insanely fun to play. Like, of all the things that I was writing, it was the thing that I was just the most delighted by. The second thing was it had the most character and flavor and like felt the most authentically me of all the things that I was currently working on. The third thing is that Cromlech got excited about it. And so I was sort of thinking about the Kickstarter, thinking about, I'll make a rule book, I want some miniatures. Is it okay if I use these miniatures? And so I think probably at the point when I asked Cromlech, I was just thinking like, I'm going to release a PDF version to Itch and I want some miniatures in it. And I was just asking them if that was cool. And then they were like, no, we'd love to put some of our own time and energy into this. And then the third thing is that the way that I could describe the game was really clear to me. And so I talked about that like clear pitch. Yep. And I think that like I actually posted a video, I think this week or last week, about another game that I'm working on called Junk Space, which is something I've just been kicking around for, nigh on 2 years at this point. And I think that like the pitch of Junk Space is really strong. It's basically Gaslands in space. It's like X-Wing meets Frostgrave. But I can't quite make the game work, and I can't quite imagine necessarily everybody being able to get hold of the right pieces. Like if you've got X-Wing ships in your cupboard, that would be great and it would be a fun game to play. But I keep thinking about that game and it just doesn't present itself in the way that Space Gits did, of like, yeah, I can absolutely package this in a way that is both appealing to an audience that I can identify and feels like authentically me, and that I can do all kinds of like, very fun, vibey things with. So yeah, I think that's how it happened, and then it evolved even more. I think when Tyler Russo, who's Billion Dollar Clown Farm on Instagram and YouTube, like he dropped a random comment on one of my videos, and I was like, oh wow, I didn't know you even knew who I was. And I emailed him because I knew that he was a commissioned miniature painter, and I was like, can I pay you to paint the models for Space Gits? And he was like so much more interested in that. He was like, oh, can I do the photography? And then I found out that he used to do like video idents for Adult Swim and stuff, and like he's a real like serious motion graphics guy. And so like suddenly I had this kind of creative partner that was just ridiculously enthusiastic about the game and was getting the vibe that I was putting out, and was excited about the joke, like was finding the jokes that I was putting in funny, and like was giving me ideas through their suggestions but also their enthusiasm. And so I think at that point, like the snowball was just super rolling, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to spend 3 months putting this thing into a shape where I'm really proud to put it out into the world.
I would imagine, Mike, having two different feedback loops there, right? One from the miniature company and one from our painter designer, that has to be reinforcing as well, right? That's got to be like, oh shit, like I'm not the only person who thinks this is cool.
Yeah, 100%. That gave me a lot of conviction, in the same way that like, taking it out in front of the public finally. And the other thing is that like I've been putting out all of these prototype games to itch as PDFs that you can get for a small amount of money or free if you're a Patreon of mine. And that's been an awesome way of like launching the game without launching the game, and then like getting two pieces of data. One is, does anyone give a hoot about it? Like, does anyone download it? Does anyone play it? Does anyone come into my Discord and say, hey, I painted ships for rad pirates, this is amazing? And the second piece of data is, do I care? Like, am I excited about it? Am I like, God dang it, like when I put Crawling Chaos out to itch initially as a PDF, I was sort of proud of that game, but the more it was out there online being available, the more I was like, do you know what? This game is really good and new and novel, and I think I want to do more. And I think I want to claim a little bit of turf here and be like, no, this was my idea first, and I want to like promote it a bit more. So that feedback loop of putting something out there and then like almost just sensing my own emotions about the fact that it's out there in the wild has been as useful as seeing what other people think, bizarrely.
So this is another situation, Mike, because we've talked a few times now where I think I have found out something new about you that I knew the whole time, but I just didn't know it till we talked about it, which is, it sounds like there's two different axes here, which is how much will the market care about this game and how much does Mike care about this game?
Right.
And it sounds like the games that make it to the end are the ones that score pretty high on both of those. Is that accurate?
That feels right. Yeah, that feels right.
What matters more, or are they the same?
When I quit my job, there was something that was really clear to me about going full-time on Planet Smasher Games, and that's that I wanted to be a potter working in my studio, producing beautiful pots. And I wouldn't be able to produce an enormous volume of pots, but people who like pots would look at my pots and go, that's a nice pot. I would like to buy that pot off you. And I didn't want to hire a staff of pot makers and get a warehouse to store my pots in, and I didn't want to get to the point where my business grows to the point where I can't do the creative work all the time. Yep. And so ultimately the answer to the question is, it matters more that I'm excited about the game, but I need, like, what's fun about Space Gits from my point of view is that I had a runway saved up and it was about 18 months and it's about to run out, and I put Space Gits live, and if it worked, I get to keep making miniature games, and if no one cared about Space Gits, then that was it. It was back to the day job. So the fact that it's had a really strong opening weekend as we stand here, it's done, north of, I think, 38 grand, and that's trending in a really strong direction for me as a way for me to make the sort of art that I want to make. Maybe I will put a Space Gits out every year, and I will try and come up with, I will spend half of the year, inventing and prototyping and putting things out on itch, and then I will sense what the right next exciting game is, and then I will sort of flip into production mode, and I'll figure out how to make that the most appealing and delightful and well packaged and completed and polished game as I can. And then if people are as excited about the next thing as they are at Space Kits, then that's what I can do, and I can make beautiful pots and people can buy them during the Kickstarter.
That is an interesting loop to start putting together. And interesting measures. I want you to think about the fact that the 4 people that listen to my show, 2 of them are probably going to back your game. So buckle up.
Thanks, you two.
Guys, we're going to take another break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about a game that, again, Mike just kind of threw out like, oh, by the way, Craig, I put out this RPG, which is my kink. And I'm like, oh, I went, grabbed it, bought it, and like sent it to like 7 people after I got done reading. We're going to talk about Crawling Chaos. We'll be right back. This is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content that you're listening to right now for free. That pitchman explains by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the 3rd floor, we refuse to interrupt your episode of Tabletop Talk with such time-wasting pleas. We pledge never to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month, because supporting content creators keeps the content coming, even if there is a link in the show's description. And there is. We don't ask you to click it and become a patron. We don't waste time rambling about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting episodes without ad breaks like this, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode knowing Tabletop Talk, despite being supported by its patrons, won't engage in such blatant appeals for support. The Crawling Chaos is a zero-prep role-playing game that lets you invent short, macabre tales of weird horror in which a lone narrator is drawn into a web of esoteric and obscure mysteries until their curiosity leads them to an eldritch doom. Play with 2 to 5 players or alone with the included solo rules. This game pissed me off a little bit, Mike, and it pissed me off for a few reasons. One, I'm angry that I didn't know about it.
My apologies. My marketing team will be whipped.
I'm going to call your PR team.
Yeah.
2, I was slightly annoyed by the fact that how much I was reading sounded so new to me. Mm-hmm. So it's like, oh, now we've got 1 billion suns for role playing games. Well done, Mike. For people listening, because the focus of my show and the focus of my channel stuff is definitely more RPGs than anything. I just don't play miniature games like I used to. I consume a lot of RPG books. It's one of I consume far more than I play.
I think that is natural and right.
Yeah.
How would you know what to play otherwise?
That's exactly right. And I was reading some things in this. The idea of multiple GMs, I've kind of seen that before, but not with the player character being the driver. Like, it was super unique. So I got to go back to my standard boring process here, Mike, which is where does this start? Well, first of all, where do you decide, I really love making miniature games, so that means I'm going to make an RPG. Where did that start? That you started to think about a completely different genre of tabletop gaming?
So I'm going to go a little bit further back. So when I'm 15, I joined this local role-playing game club. It's in the local church hall down the road. It's like I can walk to it from my house, and I start hanging out with these older boys and girls who wear leather trench coats. And first I play Bushido, then I play Vampire the Masquerade, then I realize we do live Vampire, and someone slips me a copy of the exact book was. It's a ugly beige Lovecraft anthology, and I consumed that thing, and then I wanted more, and I kept reading Lovecraft, all the way through like 15, 16. I have a real visceral memory of like I'm at like a dress rehearsal for a school play, and I'm just like hid at the back, hoping my cue doesn't come up because I'm like totally engrossed in the Dunwich Horror or whatever. And then I started playing Call of Cthulhu. I think that was like my sort of third major role-playing obsession after Warhammer Fantasy, and then Vampire Masquerade, probably Call of Cthulhu. And at the same time, this is the same Mike who is like starting to write games. So I have my old folder of games where I'm writing miniature games, and I have a superhero role-playing game, which was a dumb thing to write because I didn't really read superhero comics. I had no understanding of the like mechanisms of that world, but whatever, like well done 15-year-old Mike. There was a game called REM that was about the dream, like it was like Vampire the Masquerade, but in the dream world, and it wasn't very well elaborated. Anyway, so I was writing role-playing games as early as I was writing miniature games. So there is no transition period between those two. Those have always just been, those are two kinds of imaginative gaming that I am obsessed with. And I like board games, and I have played board games for longer than those other two kinds. But like when I discovered imaginative gaming as a overall genre, like that was it for me. And, I'm not the first person to notice that Call of Cthulhu doesn't really have anything to do with Lovecraft's narratives. That's not a unique insight, but it is an insight that's haunted me since age 16, since back in the mid-90s. And so at some point in my endless stream of spewing out new game prototypes, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I was working on I was noodling on a Gaslands role-playing game, as I do habitually, even though such a thing has not come to pass. And I'd come up with this card draw system, and I started noodling around with something. And it didn't go anywhere other than this idea. The only useful thing that came out of that process was, what if there was a narrator and that was the only thing that mattered in the game, and then the rest of it was the darkness around the narrator? Because the ensemble play of Call of Cthulhu just doesn't suit, other than the Dunwich Horror, which has I think a trio of investigators. Like there is no representation of ensemble sort of narratives. And then it's just sat there doing nothing. And I stumbled across the notes as I was tidying up a couple years ago. And so it was Christmas 2 years ago, and I didn't really have anything specific to work on, and my imagination was caught, and I started working on Crawling Chaos again. And I guess I'd been playing Trail of Cthulhu recently, and the pool points spend from that is a fun mechanic. And so I guess these embryonic ideas for the Crawling Chaos and the pool point mechanic that I'd literally just been playing the week before kind of amassed in my mind, and something sprung out. And I think this game is super fun because after writing it, a game in which you as the narrator, there is one player who's the narrator, they always speak in the first person, and they introduce the game and they have full control over their actions, but they are intended to be a somewhat passive, reactive figure in the narrative, as they always are. And actually, forgotten, it's even in the front of the book, but like I'd received from the Kickstarter not the Tales of Lovecraft, but the other one. Anyway, the Tales of Lovecraft written by Kenneth Haidt. He'd put out a little book of analysis of the stories and the locations, and in that there's an early bit where he quotes Lovecraft as saying, "Weird horror is a fiction of incident, not action." And I thought, oh wow, that's a really strong way of looking at this. That like, how do you write a role-playing game where the core activity is not taking action but reacting? And that really broke the design sort of thing open. I was like, oh, okay, holy cack, what do we do with that thought? And so there's one player, they always speak in the first person, everybody else plays the architects of their doom, and they have a set of points from which they can draw from to take actions in the game, which are essentially introducing, interrupting, or threatening the narrator. And as they sort of collaboratively try and cajole and harass the narrator, that narrator is then reacting to each of those things in the first person, and then their reactions will trigger opportunities for the next architect to jump in and come up with so it's very much a collaborative storytelling game. It's zero prep, because other than sending the narrator out of the room for a moment to agree basically what's the rough big baddie that we're dealing with here, is this is this Hastur or is this Cthulhu? And then we'll go from there. We'll just riff on that. Yeah.
Why? So it's very funny that you say that about Call of Cthulhu. And like I said, you're not the first person to say it, but the books are about a dude. Right. And the things that happen to them, and Call of Cthulhu and Trail of Cthulhu, those games, don't mimic that. They riff off of that. This very specifically puts us back into a single protagonist, a single narrator. My first thought when I was reading it is, was this ever a 1-to-1 game? One architect, one narrator, or was it always multiple architects?
I've actually not play tested it with two. Yeah. I expect it works really well. But no, that wasn't the intention, because I have a small regular gaming group that tends to be about 3 of us. Actually, and I played another RPG recently with a group of friends, and that was a 3-person game. 3 is just a nice number for RPGs, I think. And I had played it by myself quite a lot, but I've not played it head to head. But I bet it's real good.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because I think it's what makes it unique, right? I don't think, I'll be honest with you, if you had presented this as a 1-to-1 game, I'd be like, yeah, this is cool. It was the multiple architects that got me very excited that I could relive a Lovecraft story with 5 people at the table and one protagonist, and everybody gets to participate. So that's what I think is very, very interesting.
You referenced the fact that there are other games that sort of orbit around this area, and I'm aware of Bluebeard's Bride. I'm aware of Everyone is John. These are games where you have a tug of war over a central character, but it isn't a player character, it's an everybody character. And what's important about player characters is that they are entirely sacrosanct. They are controlled by one player. There is an agency that is never breached. We have lots of GM advice of don't take control of don't place thoughts in their mind or words in their mouth.
Don't tell them how they feel, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly. Tell them what they see. Don't tell them how they react. And so that was an important pillar of this design, was if I'm going to make it one player and multiple GMs, and I'm going to, be able to say that as the log line, then it better have that total agency protection for the player character that is the narrator. And then the question is, okay, well, what can the other architects do and how can they influence? Yeah, so I don't think it's the same as those. And then I thought, well, I'm quite well read in RPGs. I'm not as well versed in the total universe as I am in miniatures games. I was like, somebody else must have thought of this, Craig. And to this day, I'm still trying to, I don't believe that this is the first game that does this. I just keep asking intelligent, informed people, including Grant Howard. Actually, I got an opportunity to ask him this question. It's what? And Kenneth Haidt, I asked him, what am I missing? Where's the game that does this?
Well, I can tell you right now, if you've asked those two and they didn't come up with something, there might be a chance that this is truly new, because I literally cannot think of 2 more informed people on different tracks within the RPG world. I mean, Ken has forgotten more than I'll ever know about RPGs, and Grant knows all the crazy shit that's out there. Half of it came from his brain. So that's
yeah. And there is a Grant 1-page game that is close to this. But yeah, I think that's what's so fun about this. And, I was saying how I put it out in the world, and then I started to get kind of itchy about it, because I was like, I actually think that I assumed that this innovation couldn't possibly be novel, but I was still proud of it. And I thought that it solves the problem of Lovecraftian storytelling in a really jolly and new way. But once I realized that there was a chance that I had spotted something hiding in plain sight that nobody else had jumped on, I was like, I really want to jump on this.
Chase this down. What did, when you talk to Ken about this, what were Ken's thoughts? Because he's a pretty informed opinion.
Well, so he was sweet enough to actually provide a blurb for the copy of the book that I'm getting printed up. I mean, he was complimentary about the fact that I was tackling quite a number of perennial problems all at once in quite a short game. So I think what he was recognizing was that there was quite a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like quite high goals, quite, I was shooting for the moon with this one.
So I want to transport you to early playtests. That sounds like it may have happened with your core group here. You early form of the game, you finally get it to the table. What were some of the thoughts of the other players that impacted the final design of this game? What did people other than you say or do or react to that impacted what you finalized?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things with playtesting, other than just standing a game up and seeing if the operating system crashes, is finding other people that are not the same as you and seeing what they make of it. And so I'm the sort of role-playing gamer who is very happy to luxuriate in their own eldritch demise without further, justification for that wallowing. But one of the people who play tested it, when he was he's much more keen sort of board game player. Been playing role-playing games for 35 years, just the same as me, but like very keen, he likes winning board games. And so his experience was being ganged up on and not really having a way to win. And I was like, that's such a weird piece of feedback. Like, in what role-playing game do you win? And he was like, yeah, but in this case, because there's all of you on one side of the table and me on the other, I went into a bit of a fight mode and I wanted to win. So I added a mechanic in the game as a result of that. It took a couple of iterations, but what I introduced... Actually, I reintroduced this because this was originally in the prototype, but I cut it out because it seemed unnecessary to me because I didn't think I needed this. And the Dark Ambition is the name of the mechanic in the game. And that was basically to say, well, look, why don't we give a hidden objective to the narrator, something like, peer beyond the veil of science, or, ensure the world remembers you after you're gone. And so if you suffer an eldritch demise, but you also achieve your dark ambition of peering beyond the veil of science or something, then you can achieve a sort of Pyrrhic victory. And although you've been, crushed by bugs from within and without, you are sort of, you're completing the narrative arc that you kind of secretly set for yourself. And that can be really fun and can provide a kind of satisfaction, both narratively, both diegetically and non-diegetically, because you've also been told that you've sort of won.
So there's a few things that we can wrap this up that I want to comment on. One is I'm really glad you brought that up, because the first thing that as I was reading it, I went, oh, that's interesting, was the narrator leaves the room and our architects come up with the secret, right? Here's the secrets. Here's what's going to happen when our narrator comes back. So the narrator comes back and they're out of the joke, right? They are now the only person sitting at that table that doesn't know the secret.
Right, like a social deduction game. There's now there's an imbalance in information in the room.
Exactly, and I loved the idea that while I'm in the other room, I've got a menu that I can look at. That I can pick from. So I'm going to come back in the room with my own little secret, you assholes, and you're not going to know what those are.
100%.
And I also loved, the other thing I thought was very interesting is there's zero mechanical aspects to that obsession, right? So that secret objective that I have, I love that that's mechanically meaningless, that is just something completely in the narrative that matters. And a lot of times that matters the most. And there's so many times you see that in games, sometimes even now you're seeing it in board games where there'll be an element added that has no mechanical impact, but changes the play experience completely. And I think that does that. The other piece that I thought was very interesting is that I think that there's a multiverse somewhere where Crawling Chaos has a very unstructured architecture where it's a true, like, quote unquote story game, the same way like For the Queen is, where there really isn't these actual mechanics to it. And I thought it was very interesting, Mike, that there is mechanical constraints, Trail of Cthulhu-esque. I didn't even make that connection until you said it, for the architects. Can I ask real quickly why? So you could have very easily had card prompts for the architects, or the architects each of them get 3 turns and they get to fuck up the narrator's life. But you put a mechanical constraint on the architects. And was that from the very beginning? You always knew you needed that? Does that make sense?
So it started from an exploration of a story of like a role-playing game mechanic where the actions that you could take were cards in your hand, and that was clumsy, and I would have to like provide a custom deck and stuff. But the deeper reason is that constraints breed creativity, and in a story game environment where you could say anything, I don't want to be told I can say anything. I want to be given 3 or 4 kind of directions or prompts or things. Yeah. So if I'm staring down the barrel of like a an architect sheet which has 3 points in liminal spaces and 1 in the city, and I'm thinking, well, what can I do with these? How can I spend these? What am I going to do with my 3 liminal spaces? Like you start to think, oh, okay, now I'm starting to get a vibe about maybe where I'll push the story. And so even when you're not speaking as the architect, you've got something to examine in front of you. And again, it could have been decks of cards, but like once I discovered this idea that actually I could just have a character sheet in inverted commas, and I could provide the same level of like sort of in my down moments, I'm looking at it and going, oh yeah, okay, I'm getting an idea of what I could do next. That's important because like for me, I'm very comfortable with very freeform role playing, and I love watching some of that stuff on YouTube where, it's just pure freeform improv. But I recognize that one of the reasons I'm good at pure freeform improv is both that I did a ton of it back at school. Like we used to do like Whose Line Is It Anyway, like for our parents as part of like school activities. I've done, some theatre training, and I've played like 30 odd years of role-playing games. So I'm very comfortable with that. That's not everyone. Not everyone has got that experience, or even if they do, not everyone is just comfortable with freeform improv. And not everyone is like, they've freshly caffeinated and maybe they're tired and maybe this is their relaxation activity. And so adding mechanical elements for me is all about providing just help, struts for fun to rest upon and be lifted up on.
People talk about with role playing is, well, you can do anything, and the burden that can often create can be overwhelming. So guys, we're going to take one more break. When we get back from this break, I'm going to pick Mike's brain. We're going to stop talking about all the shit he makes, and I want to talk about what he consumes. We'll be right back. Are you enjoying our long-form interviews with creatives on this podcast? Maybe you're craving deeper discussions about our guests or some of the RPG plays on our Twitch and YouTube channel. Well, I've got an opportunity for you. You see, Third Floor Wars now has a Patreon-only Discord server. You can join a vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts diving deep into every episode of our RPG plays and podcast. Connect with fans, engage in spirited discussions, and unlock the behind-the-scenes insights. For just $1 a month, access a world of tabletop gaming goodness. Connect with passionate gamers who share your love for the Tabletop Podcast and everything produced on the Third Floor. As a Patreon supporter, you also enjoy ad-free episodes of this podcast. You can immerse yourselves in captivating stories and fascinating interviews without interruptions, taking your listening experience to a whole new level. By joining the Third Floor Wars Patreon community, you not only gain exclusive access to the Patreon-only Discord server, but you also support the growth of my podcast and channels. Your contributions enable me to continue creating high-quality content that entertains, educates, and upskills tabletop enthusiasts like yourself. Maybe don't wait. Join the Third Floor Wars Patreon today and unlock a world of camaraderie, discussions, and knowledge. Visit patreon.com/Third Floor Wars or check the link in the show notes and come join our community. The Third Floor Wars Patreon-only Discord server awaits you. I and the other patrons can't wait to welcome you with open arms and a fistful of dice. So, Mike, the way I like to end interviews now is talk about things that you have been watching, reading, playing, that you have no involvement in, that you are truly on the receiving end of this type of media, but it's gotten its hooks into you. I need to start with the poster behind your head. So I've been spotting it as you've been moving around Nosferatu. So I'm going to do what I normally don't do, which is tell us, I want to start talking about something particular. Have you seen Eggers' Nosferatu?
I have not. I have not seen the new Nosferatu film yet. I am a man with 2 young children, and so disappearing to the cinema with my wife to see new films has been a distant dream, or indeed just going to the pub has been a distant dream. Hopefully, we'll get Granny around and we'll see that if Vanessa wants to see it. The poster on my wall is the 70s one from Werner Herzog with Klaus Kinski in. And I love that film so much. I love all of the 70s Herzog movies with my whole soul.
I was going to say, have you seen the original Nosferatu?
I have. I watched it at university. I did film at university, so I did watch the creaky old Murnau one. It's perfectly good. I do like that and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. They're just fantastic, cultural artifacts. But they don't have Isabella Gianni and Klaus Kinski yelling and stuff. He actually doesn't yell in that one, but he's he generally is terrifying as he ever is. There's one of the things that I've recently reread. There's a book called Herzog on Herzog. It's a Faber interview book, and they re-released it recently. Called it's got a different name now, and I picked it up. I was like, oh, I love that one 10 years ago. Let me read this one, and found out it's just the same one expanded with a new title. Anyway, in that book, Herzog is the most hilarious man. He's so funny because he's so dry and he's so mad. And there's a bit in the 70s Nosferatu where the ship turns up with Dracula, and the gangplank goes down, and suddenly rats are everywhere. Rats fill the streets. And because this is a Herzog film, what they did was they dyed a bunch of rats black to make sure they were all black. And then they released them to get one shot. And the interviewer's like, how did you collect up all the rats afterwards? He said, we didn't. They were all gone. We
didn't.
We had one take.
We filmed the plague and then just let it spread.
Yeah,
that's pretty. But
it's
amazing.
It's the same. Like there's a film where he puts a boat in a hugely tall tree in the middle of the Amazon, and the interviewer's the same. He's like, "How did you get the boat down?" I believe the boat is still there.
I'm not as familiar with him as you are, but that makes me want to go read that book and go back and explore some of his movies. Now, have you seen any other Eggers movies? Have you seen like The Witch and what is the Norse one that everybody but me loves? I can't remember the name of it. Is he somebody that's on your radar as a filmmaker?
He is not, actually. He is not. I am, like, my early years were very film obsessed because I had a grandfather that used to give me VHS tapes of important movies.
Amazing.
Some of which were important, like 2001. Some just had, what was that one with angels and Alanis Morissette is God? He was obsessed with that movie. I don't know why.
What you're talking about.
All right. It's terrible. And then I went to university. I studied film, and then I guess at some point, I went off the boil on my film. So I've sort of seen a few things recently, but I don't. As I said, like the last 10 years, I've not been able to get to cinema very much. So I don't watch a lot of video media. I play a bunch of video games, and I read a lot of books, mostly comic books at the moment, because as I said, with the burnout, like one of the things that happened with the burnout was basically for 6 months I couldn't read, and I didn't want, and I couldn't really deal with any like realistic conflict in like well-written films about human drama were just like too much for me. Yeah. So I read a lot of comics. I started really digging into the 2000 AD back catalogue, which nice. I just wish as a kid I had graduated from Asterix and the Beano into 2000 AD. I'm not terribly, I think what actually happened was I graduated into Games Workshop Army books, but whatever. So I've been reading a lot of, catching up with a lot of 2000 AD that I should have read 20, 30 years ago. And also just picking up a lot of like classic comics and graphic novels that, people consider to be worthy of reading, and that I had, just missed. I just missed like all of the sort of classic graphic novel as literature stuff as a kid, other than the kind of British stuff like Sandman and things, which I read from the library.
Which of those landed for you, Mike, as you dove into the canon of the giants of the graphic novel literature pieces? How many of are any of those that you read and you went, yeah, I get it, like this is pretty goddamn amazing? And did any of them just kind of like go, all right?
Yeah, like, because I was commenting to my friend Glenn, actually. I was saying, like, oh yeah, I don't really read graphic novels. I'm not certain of their artistic merit. And he was like, okay, you're a total idiot. Let me give you a list and come back in a year and we'll talk about them. And so on that list, was some things, like, I guess it's sort of zooming in on Alan Moore specifically, like I read V for Vendetta, like knowing about it from cultural, other cultural milieu. And I read that. And I read the Swamp Thing ones. And like, that's a good example of like where V for Vendetta, I was like, oh yes, okay, I completely understand why this delivery mechanism, this story, this connection of image and words, like I understand now. But this Swamp Thing, like it was fine. It was this guy running around, and it was a Swamp Thing. Like I didn't really understand like what the connection between like this being, an equally towering work from this, this creator. So that's a good example of where like I tried a couple of things and one landed, one didn't. But yeah, so that's been a fun thing, like working through Glenn's list of like, get your shit sorted out, Mike.
Yeah, the Swamp Thing's tough because the thing that makes Swamp Thing important is the context of it, right? It's one of those situations where it was so different at the time that Moore was it was kind of like Frank Miller with Daredevil. Like you go back and read the Frank Miller Daredevil, which is, legendary, that Frank Miller like reimagined this character and changed everything. And you go back and read him now and you're like, well, okay, whatever, because you weren't there, right? You weren't reading Daredevil up to that point, and then you didn't get your mind blown out. Same thing with Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. You go back to it and now it's like going back and watching Casablanca. Casablanca looks like a series of just trite tropes now because it's created those tropes and mimicked everything afterwards. So I would put that in there. How about things like, tell me what was on the list. Like, this is super fascinating to me. What else did you read on that list and what was there? I would assume Watchmen was there. Dark Knight Returns, Mouse. What else?
Yes, both of those were on, although I haven't got to either of those yet, although they are purchased and on my shelf, ready, queued up. I'm trying to think what else really struck me. I guess because he's a Brit and he was super into 2000 AD, like that's where some of this started coming in. So like there's this strange one about a moustache twiddling superhero that is like an English gentleman. There was I'm too tired to recall names of books, as we've already established in this conversation. But yeah, I'm still very uneducated about it. But I think what's fun is that like, age 40, somebody just kind of kicked the stool out from under me and was like, oh no, by the way, there's this whole other section of the bookshop you're allowed to enjoy now.
It takes a little while to get the language of it. And it sounds like V for Vendetta kind of opened that up for you because it's its own medium that can't be mimicked. And there's a reason that there's been a lot of difficulty in translating graphic novels to film. And that's a recognition that they're very different mediums. And, the one time where it was done panel for panel was Snyder's Watchmen. I mean, literally you could have the book open and flip pages and watch the movie. And as much as I love that book and as much as I appreciate what he did in that movie, it's not a good movie because he didn't translate it to the new medium. He didn't do what you need to do, which is to say, I am now telling this story in a different way because it's being delivered to them in a different way. That's an example.
I haven't started really reading comics on my tablet. I've been like buying secondhand comics and reading them in physical paper format. I was chatting to a buddy. In fact, I was chatting to Sean Sutter, to drop a name, and he was telling me that he loves reading them. He's an illustrator and artist. He loves reading them on iPad because he can like zoom in and he can luxuriate in a particular image and really look at it and look at the brushstrokes and stuff. And so it's interesting because I wonder, I'm not an aficionado enough to know whether this is true or not, but I wonder whether there's a similarly, perhaps not as significant, but like a different experience of reading it on the page where you can flip backwards and forwards and you can scan up and down versus the like being able to zoom in and almost like reframe every image for yourself as you choose to.
It's very different. In fact, it's funny that you say that because I'm old as fuck. So I have, I consumed the hard media for all of these, from being a child up to being an adult. And I signed up for like Marvel Unlimited, right? Which is the digital comic book repository. And they have a reading mode in that, which shows you panel by panel. So instead of showing you the whole page, and you read the whole page, it shows you panel 1, panel 2, panel 3. And what's nice is it's nice and large for my old eyes, but it destroys the genre for me. I cannot read it that way because it is deliberately presented as a page. And part of the beauty of the language is how the artist takes you through the panels and how the panels inform each other.
You've completely obviated the composition that the artist intended.
Very much so. Very much so. It's like the only analogy, and it's not a great one that I try to explain it to people, is imagine a book where there was only one sentence per page. You just lose the entire flow through that process. So I've completely dictated what we've been talking about here, Mike, which is the exact opposite of what this segment is about. So that's on me. Tell me something that has gotten you excited recently, something that you have been consuming that really got its hooks into you.
Do you know what? I've not actually had like a real passion this year. I think I'm frustrated by that. But I'll tell you something I did play recently which intrigued me, which is I played Citizen Sleeper. Which is an indie RPG, and I was really intrigued because I'd been messing about with some RPG mechanical systems, and I was picking up wasn't Blades in the Dark, it was the Star Wars one, Scum and Villainy. Yeah, Scum and Villainy. And it's got the clock system in from that. And the clock system is like 100% central to the way that Citizen Sleeper is presented. And I thought that Citizen Sleeper, I actually didn't finish it because there's this arc that you can complete partway through the game, which felt so narratively satisfying that I was like, oh, well, the story's done. I don't know why I would do the rest of the busy work. But like, it's so interesting to see both their deployment of tabletop game mechanics quite directly into an indie video game. And also, like, I think it was very successful in achieving the moment of guilt that only games can create, where,
How so?
You can read, like, a story or a book can, a film can lead you to the place where you see a character do something and you're like, oh man, that's a real bad thing that happened and you did a bad thing and I feel bad for you. But what only games can do is they can present a father and a child who are trying to scrape enough money together to get the ship home or onto the next thing. And you've got a decision about whether you prioritize your own goals because you're really living on the edge of poverty and probably you will die because you've got a medical condition. But if you just go and babysit his kid a few times, maybe he can scrape together enough stuff. And that was within a milieu of like 9 or 10 other things that were going on. And I was getting, threatened by some bounty hunter. And I forgot about the dad and his child, and the clock ran out. And I felt gutted. Like, I let that guy down, that family down. And I was like, oh man, that's hit. Like, well done, guys. You really nailed it with that. And that, I think, is the beauty of games as an art form, is that no other medium can make that happen. And when it does happen, I don't want every game to make me feel guilty like that, but like, well done to Citizen Sleeper for hitting me in the gut with that one, because it really worked.
I think it's something that is unique to video games, not all video games, but those types of video games, and unique to RPGs as well, because you can have that same experience in RPGs.
Well, that's because the core DNA of games is decision making and agency. Right. You can take that and you can say things to the player with it that only they can back themselves into that place, and then they are the person who did that. It's lovely. It's a thing.
So, Mike, there's a lot of things you can do on a Sunday afternoon, like finishing Citizen Sleeper instead of leaving it there unfinished, but you decided to spend it with me, and I want you to know I appreciate that.
This has been a joy, as it always is, Craig. Thanks for letting me hang out with you.
Hey, for those of you listening, guess what? This is the end. You made it. You listened to the whole damn thing. Do me a favor. Take care of yourself, and if you got a couple extra spoons, take care of somebody else as well. Take care. Hey, are you still here?
Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.